my daughter's wedding, they hid me behind a column. I made one call that changed everything. Lucy Harper adjusted the simple pearl necklace around her neck, the familiar weight grounding her amidst the swirl of emotions threatening to overwhelm. Today was her daughter Mia's wedding day, a day that should have been filled with joy, pride, and celebration. But as she stood in the grand reception hall of Cedar Hill's most lavish estate, Lucy felt anything but cherished. The polished marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of roses and expensive perfume. Guests in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos drifted past, their murmurs punctuated by polite laughter. Yet despite the grandeur, Lucy's place was not among the honored. Instead, she was standing stiffly behind a tall stone column near the back of the room, half hidden from view. Her mother-in-law's terse instructions echoed in her mind. "Stay out of sight. You're not part of this family's image." The coldness in those words struck deeper than any glare from a stranger. It wasn't just the exclusion, it was the declaration that Lucy, a woman who had worked tirelessly to support Mia after her recent divorce, was nothing more than an embarrassment. She pictured her little girl, glowing in her delicate lace gown, surrounded by family and friends who adored her, while she was concealed like a secret shame. The wedding photographer hovered nearby, snapping pictures of the happy couple and their guests, but never once turning toward the shadowed corner where Lucy lingered. Her heart ached as she caught Mia's eye across the room, a mixture of happiness and conflicted guilt washing over her daughter's face. Mia had pleaded privately to include her mother in the formal introductions, but the final decision was out of her hands. Lucy swallowed hard, fighting the sting of tears that threatened to fall. Somewhere deep inside, she wondered if this was punishment for living too humbly or for not being wealthy enough to match the extravagance surrounding her. A group of elderly guests whispered behind their hands, glancing in Lucy's direction with thinly veiled disdain. She heard faint snorts of derision when she accidentally brushed against the column while trying to steady her stiff legs. The laughter was quiet but sharp, like whispered knives slicing at her dignity. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the cool stone, wishing she could disappear entirely. She was supposed to be the proud mother of the bride, a woman who had weathered storms to raise her daughter with love and integrity. Yet here she was, invisible, reduced to a mere afterthought in a celebration built to showcase wealth and status. The room buzzed with toasts and cheers, but to Lucy, the sounds echoed hollowly, underscoring the cold isolation she felt. The tension in her chest grew heavier with every passing minute. It wasn't just the public humiliation. What hurt most was the silent message that she didn't belong, that her sacrifices meant nothing compared to the glittering facade of the family hosting the wedding. Her mind raced, desperate to find some way to reclaim her place, some spark of hope to hold on to amid the shadows. The day was unfolding as a cruel reminder of all she'd lost, not just her marriage, but her dignity before those she loved most. As the ceremony's music swelled and the guests turned their attention to Mia and her new husband, Lucy pressed her back firmly against the cold column, her breath caught in her throat. The invisible walls around her heart felt unyielding, yet beneath the hurt, a quiet resolve began to stir, a resolve that would soon change everything. Lucy's humiliation didn't fade with the passing hours. It deepened, tightening like a noose around her spirit. The whispers grew sharper, more pointed as the evening progressed. The guests, dressed to impress, exchanged glances and sly remarks when they caught sight of her hidden figure behind the column. She overheard bits of conversation. Words like embarrassing, inappropriate, and not fitting in floated through the air like poison. Each syllable chipped away at her self-worth. The once proud woman who had faced life's hardships with quiet strength now felt like a ghost in her own daughter's wedding. Mia's joyous laughter from across the room only served to magnify Lucy's pain. She wanted to reach out, to pull her daughter into a comforting embrace, but the invisible barrier placed between them by a family unwilling to accept her widened with every passing moment. Her heart clenched at the conflicted looks Mia sometimes cast her way, a silent apology mixed with helplessness. Lucy knew Mia didn't approve of this exclusion. She saw the way her daughter's eyes darted toward her when no one was watching, the way her smile faltered briefly before she retraced her steps back to the crowd. The more Lucy tried to steel herself, the heavier the weight of invisibility became. The cruel spectacle wasn't just about being out of place. It was a pointed reminder of how society judges a woman, not by her character, but by her status, her wealth, and her associations. For Lucy, freshly divorced and without the financial backing to match the opulence surrounding her, this public shunning felt like a final verdict pronounced by the very people she wished would understand. She thought back to the years of sacrifice, working multiple jobs, nurturing Mia through school challenges, and keeping their small home warm with love. None of that seemed to matter here. What mattered was the gleam of diamond rings, the designer labels, and the polished smiles of the elite. Lucy's chest tightened as tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely. She refused to let herself unravel completely, even as the shame sought to pull her under. Suddenly, a sharp whisper cut through the hum of celebration. "Can you believe she's actually trying to come between us? This is a family event, not her charity case." The disdain in the voice was unmistakable, cold, calculated, and cruel. Lucy's jaw tightened. It was not just exclusion, it was an attack on her very existence. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her phone in her clutch. She hesitated for a moment, then found the number she needed. Dialing felt like a lifeline, someone who might hear her, who might see past the facade and understand the deep wounds hiding beneath the surface. As the line connected, Lucy's voice was low but steady. She carefully recounted the injustice, the humiliation, and the invisible walls that had been erected around her. The journalist on the other end listened intently, her tone shifting from concern to determination. Lucy felt a flicker of hope, a chance to rewrite the narrative, to reclaim her dignity, not through confrontation, but through exposure and truth. The power of a single well-placed story might finally shine a light on what the glossy wedding invite tried to conceal. As the call ended, Lucy swallowed her fear and took a slow breath, feeling a simmering strength rise from within. She was no longer just a shadow behind a column. She was someone ready to be seen and heard. Sometimes, survival isn't about staying quiet. It's about finding the courage to speak up. If you've ever felt pushed into the background when you deserve to shine, remember Lucy's story. There's strength in vulnerability, and sometimes all it takes is one call to change everything. The hours following Lucy's call were a turbulent mix of anxiety and fleeting hope. She returned to her shadowed corner behind the column, but now, unlike before, her mind buzzed with whispers of possibility. Could a single voice truly shake the walls built by pride and prejudice? As the wedding feast continued around her, plates of gourmet food, clinking glasses, and laughter mingling with music, Lucy wrestled with a storm of emotions. Doubt gnawed at her resolve. What if no one believed her? What if her story only added fuel to the cold judgments already aimed her way? Determined to hold on to some sense of agency, Lucy attempted small gestures to reconnect with Mia during the evening. When her daughter slipped behind the crowd to adjust her veil or took sips of water at the edge of the room, Lucy tried to catch her eye, to send silent messages of love and solidarity. That each time, fate seemed to side against them. Servants quickly moved Mia back into the spotlight. Family members shushed her away, and the constant buzz of guests made meaningful connection near impossible. The repeated rejections stung sharply. Even Mia's warmth was veiled by hesitation, as if the invisible barrier around her mother was as much a prison for her as Lucy. Despite the crushing loneliness, Lucy refused to let despair drown her spirit. She thought of the long nights she had spent comforting Mia through heartbreaks and disappointments, of the unwavering support she had given without ask or complaint. If she could be that steady rock for her daughter then, she could endure this trial now. Yet obstacles mounted relentlessly. When Lucy attempted to join a group of relatives during a toast, she was met with awkward silences and thin smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Conversations would lull abruptly, eyes darting away, as if she were an unwelcome intruder. One particularly cold comment, "Maybe she's here to remind us of what real hardship looks like," sent a fresh wave of humiliation crashing down on her. The words struck not with kindness or concern, but with cruel exoticism, painting her as a spectacle rather than a person. Amid these crushing moments, a small beacon of hope emerged. A few guests who had overheard the earlier call began whispering among themselves, exchanging glances that hinted at curiosity and skepticism toward the orchestrated social slights. Lucy noticed the subtle shifts but remained guarded, uncertain whether their support would manifest or dissolve into new gossip. But in her heart, she clung to the possibility that the truth might ripple through the glittering crowd like an unexpected tide. With each passing minute, the weight on her shoulders felt heavier. But her silent defiance grew, a quiet promise that her identity and worth would not be defined by shame or exclusion. The night pressed on, the music rising and fading, the waves of celebration ebbing and flowing around her solitary figure. Lucy's inner voice whispered continuously, "Hold on, something is coming. You are stronger than they think." And somewhere beyond the polished walls and severed smiles, a change was indeed beginning to stir. But for now, Lucy remained caught between the shadows of a night meant for joy and the fragile hope of a dawn yet to break. As the evening wore on, the glimmer of hope Lucy clung to was eclipsed by an even harsher reality. The subtle exclusion she had endured had erupted into outright coldness. The whispers became pointed remarks, said just loud enough for her to hear. At one moment, she caught a chilling exchange between two women near the dessert table. "Can you believe they're letting her even breathe in here?" one hissed, the other nodding with an approving grin. Lucy's fingers tightened around the cool marble of the column, her knuckles paling. Her sense of invisibility deepened into something far darker, a suffocating isolation that no amount of self-assurance could easily shake. Guests who had once merely whispered now blatantly avoided her gaze, crossing the room to keep their distance. Even the staff, who had at first offered polite smiles, seemed to mirror the patronizing airs of the wealthy elite. It was as if Lucy was trapped in a glass cage, visible but unreachable, entirely alone amid a crowd. Her daughter, Mia, was caught in the crossfire of her own conflicting emotions, her radiant gown a stark contrast to the shadow that Lucy inhabited. Several times Mia glanced toward her mother with expressions that flickered between helplessness and sorrow, as if wishing she could defy the social currents dragging her away. But despite the pain visible in her eyes, Mia remained silent, unwilling or unable to confront the fury brewing among the powerful family that now dictated the evening's narrative. The weight of the evening pressed down hard on Lucy's heart, an unrelenting storm of shame and anger. She had endured judgments before, being a humble woman from a small town, navigating the loneliness of her recent divorce, but nothing had prepared her for this cold, orchestrated rejection. Her pride felt shattered beneath the glare of a cruel social spectacle that stripped her down to nothing more than a pitiable outsider. She wanted to scream, to shatter the delicate glass walls enclosing her, but instead, she stayed still, her back pressed against the column, as if it were the only anchor left in a sea of hostility. The room was alive with laughter and toasts honoring the bride and groom, yet Lucy felt hollowed out, as if each cheer echoed against a cavernous emptiness inside her. Just as she considered retreating completely, perhaps slipping away quietly into the night, a sudden buzz broke through her numbing despair. Her phone vibrated gently in her clutch. It was a message from the journalist friend she had confided in hours earlier. The words on the screen sent a shock through her veins. The story had been published. The details of her exclusion were now no longer a secret hidden behind whispered aside glances. They were revealed to the world. The weight Lucy had carried all night shifted, simultaneously confusing and electrifying. The injustice, the cruelty, the humiliation. They were out in the open now. Public eyes and voices would no longer allow them to be buried beneath polite smiles and genteel facades. The story was spreading fast, igniting conversations far beyond the confines of this opulent hall. Lucy's breath caught. Perhaps she was no longer just the hidden mother behind a column, but the spark of a challenge to the very system that had tried to erase her. In that fragile moment, a quiet resolve burned brighter than ever before. The night had pierced her with pain, yes, but it had also lit the way toward something greater. If you've ever faced moments when the world tried to silence you, remember that your story has power. Sometimes being pushed to the edge is what prepares you to rise higher than ever before. Her world felt as though it had crumbled beneath her feet, yet amid the ruins, she found herself sifting through the debris of her dignity for some fragment of hope. As the memory of that dreadful day clung to her skin like a second scar, Lucy sought refuge, not in loud declarations or desperate apologies, but in quiet moments, alone, where tears could fall without judgment. Each morning, she awoke with the heavy weight of embarrassment still anchored in her chest. Yet beneath that weight, an ember of resolve flickered faintly. The isolation that once had threatened to consume her transformed, slowly, into a space for inner dialogue. She began to notice the subtle ways in which life continued, the warmth of the sun through the window at dawn, the gentle hum of the city outside, the small kindnesses from strangers that often passed unnoticed. These small truths offered a slender lifeline, a reminder that not all was lost in the shadow cast by humiliation. It was during one such quiet moment, curled up with a worn notebook gifted by her late grandmother, that Lucy sketched the first outlines of what she now called her comeback. She scrawled words of encouragement, little affirmations she wished she could whisper to herself when the world was harshest. You are more than their whispers. Kindness breeds strength, and your story is waiting to be rewritten. These were not mere clichés, but lifeboats, and clinging to them was both a comfort and a challenge. However, small victories often met with setbacks. When Lucy attempted to engage with colleagues or attend the community workshops she previously loved, she encountered cold shoulders and whispered comments that stabbed anew. Each encounter fortified her resolve, yet tested her spirit. The subtle undertow of exclusion was difficult. It threatened to drag her under with waves of doubt and recrimination. Why bother? The silent voice in her mind asked. The sting of being overlooked or mistrusted was a new kind of social wound that didn't bleed visibly but left invisible scars. Yet within this struggle, Lucy found unexpected allies. Marissa, an empathetic coworker who had witnessed part of the public humiliation, reached out with a simple message one afternoon. I can't imagine what you're feeling, but I believe in your strength. This gesture, small as it seemed, reminded Lucy she was not entirely alone. The path forward remained shrouded in uncertainty, but the spark of connection grew, promising a light at the end of the tunnel. It was a prompt, gentle push toward healing and eventually reclaiming the parts of her life clouded by shame. At times, Lucy's nights teetered between hope and despair, but slowly, the days began to align in her favor. The key was not ignoring the pain, but confronting it with quiet courage and the belief that her worth was not determined by fleeting opinions or cruel mistakes. Those contemplative days shaped a burgeoning strength, preparing her for the breakthrough she had quietly awaited, the inevitable chance to turn the page and transform humiliation into empowerment. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by judgment or doubt, remember Lucy's journey. Sometimes, the hardest battles are fought in silence, and the first step to overcoming lies in the gentle rediscovery of hope within yourself. One rainy afternoon, as Lucy sat quietly in the corner of a bustling cafe, she noticed a familiar face hesitating at the entrance. It was Caroline, the very person responsible for the painful humiliation that had nearly broken Lucy's spirit. The woman's expression was unreadable, part guilt, part apprehension, but it was clear she hadn't expected to see Lucy here, alive and seemingly unfazed. After a moment of tense stillness, Caroline approached, her voice low and uncertain. "Lucy, can we talk?" she asked almost inaudibly. The cafe seemed to hush around them, and Lucy felt a whirlwind of emotions rise within her. Anger, pain, but unexpectedly, curiosity. This was the moment she had both dreaded and longed for. Instead of retreating, Lucy nodded. They moved to a quieter table, and Caroline began to unravel a story Lucy hadn't known. Behind the scenes, Caroline had been struggling with her own fears and insecurities, projecting them onto Lucy as a misguided defense. She confessed that she never intended to destroy Lucy's reputation, but was afraid that Lucy's talents would outshine her own, leading to destructive envy. The apology was sincere and delivered without defensiveness, opening a door that Lucy hadn't dared hope would be unlatched. But it wasn't just Caroline's confession that changed the course of Lucy's journey. It was what happened next. As Caroline spoke, a small crowd that had gathered noticed the exchange. Whispers died down, eyes once cold, now filled with contemplation. Word spread that Lucy had faced her tormentor with grace, not bitterness, sparking a quiet but powerful shift in the community's perception. Among those watching was Marissa, who approached Lucy with a smile that radiated pride and encouragement. "You've turned a painful chapter into a powerful lesson," she said softly. It was more than validation. It was a declaration that Lucy was reclaiming her narrative and reshaping how others saw her. The antagonists who had once celebrated Lucy's downfall now found themselves isolated by their own actions. The dynamic shifted. What once was a source of humiliation became a testament to resilience and truth. It was a turning point, not just for Lucy, but for everyone who witnessed her courage. This unexpected act of reconciliation and the community's response sent ripples far beyond that rainy afternoon. People who had whispered behind Lucy's back now found themselves reaching out, seeking to understand rather than judge. The shame that had hung heavy in the air lifted, replaced by respect and a renewed sense of connection. If you ever find yourself at the mercy of others' cruelty or misunderstanding, remember that sometimes the most profound strength lies in facing your challenges with openness and compassion. A single act of kindness, even toward those who have hurt you, can change the entire story. Take a deep breath and believe in the power of forgiveness and courage. Your own breakthrough might be just around the corner. With Caroline's apology sparking a surprising turn in the community, Lucy felt a newfound strength coursing through her veins. It was no longer just about reclaiming her dignity. It was about standing tall in the face of adversity and rewriting the narrative that others had tried to control. The very people who once whispered behind her back now faced her with a mixture of respect and quiet admiration. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. Lucy took deliberate steps, gently but firmly redefining her place in both her professional world and personal circles. She began volunteering to lead new projects at work, each success a quiet assertion of her capability and resilience. When old colleagues who had kept their distance approached her, she responded with warmth and confidence instead of defensiveness, demonstrating that she was not just surviving her experience, but growing beyond it. There were moments of vulnerability still. Inevitably, old doubts lingered like shadows on the edge of her mind, but each small triumph helped to shove them further into the background. She discovered something powerful in the act of forgiving herself, acknowledging that mistakes did not diminish her worth or her potential to rise again. Caroline, too, faced consequences, nothing punitive or cruel, but instead a natural distancing from the community she'd alienated. This shift saddened Lucy briefly, but she understood that healing sometimes requires space and accountability. More importantly, Caroline's remorse showed that integrity and humility have a place even in broken relationships. Among the most profound changes was how Lucy handled the lingering scar of public judgment. Rather than allowing it to define her, she used her story to encourage others grappling with their struggles. She spoke at local workshops on resilience and kindness, sharing not only her pain, but also the steps she took to move forward. Her vulnerability became a source of strength, proof that reaching out and embracing one's scars could inspire change in others. The people who had once been antagonists found themselves challenged by Lucy's quiet determination. Their attempts at undermining her faded into irrelevance, overshadowed by the genuine connections and achievements she fostered. The community that had once reveled in her humiliation now celebrated her perseverance. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting her living room in hues of gold, Lucy allowed herself a moment to reflect. The road had been long and treacherous, marked by pain and doubt, but every step had brought her closer to the woman she was meant to become. She realized that the injustice she endured was not a mark against her, but a catalyst, forcing her to discover strength she never knew she had. To anyone who feels crushed by shame or rejection, know that your story is not over. You have within you a reservoir of courage waiting to be tapped. Sometimes, the most powerful victories are those quietly claimed in the face of hardship. Lucy's journey was far from perfect, but it was real, and it proved that justice isn't always about punishment. Often, it is about standing firm, rising above, and reclaiming your own truth. Years later, Lucy stood on a small stage in a bright community hall, facing a room full of people who had once been strangers to her pain, but were now companions in the journey of resilience. Her voice was steady, carrying the weight of experience, yet imbued with warmth and hope. She spoke not of victimhood, but of transformation, the power of kindness, forgiveness, and inner strength to overcome humiliation and reclaim one's dignity. Her story, once a source of isolation, had blossomed into a beacon of inspiration. The path to this moment had been anything but smooth. Lucy recalled the nights of doubt, the sting of judgment, and the heavy chains of embarrassment that once threatened to keep her grounded in despair. But she also remembered the small acts of courage, the silent affirmations, the unexpected allyships, and most importantly, the decision to refuse the role of victim in her own life story. Her journey taught her that true strength does not lie in never falling, but in rising every time we do. Among the crowd were faces old and new, friends who had seen her at her lowest, and those who had found hope through her words. The community that had once whispered behind her back now listened intently, their respect undeniable. Lucy's experience had forged connections deeper than any superficial success ever could. As she finished her speech, the applause wasn't just for the story she told, but for the essence of resilience and humility she embodied. Lucy smiled, not out of vanity, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had lived through pain and emerged whole. She had learned that humiliation, while painful and deeply personal, need not define one's future. It could be a cruel teacher, but it also held lessons about empathy, strength, and the grace to forgive, even when forgiveness seemed impossible. To those who struggle in silence, feeling overwhelmed by shame or rejection, Lucy's message was clear. Your value is not diminished by the harsh judgments of others. There is unmatched power in kindness toward yourself and the courage to seek light in the darkest moments. Her story is a reminder that everyone has the capacity to rise, grow, and inspire. No matter the severity of the fall, the possibility of renewal awaits. If you've ever faced judgment or cruelty and felt like giving up, remember Lucy's journey. Allow it to fuel your own path to self-love and resilience. Transformation is always possible when you nurture hope and refuse to be defined by your lowest moments. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. See you in our next story.